it can bring up some significant emotional challenges. And our sources directly address something called the imposter phenomenon. This isn't just, a fleeting feeling of self-doubt. It's a very real and documented psychological pattern that can seriously impact your academic journey. And it seems particularly prevalent among international students navigating this new environment.
Yes, the imposter phenomenon, or imposter syndrome as it's often called. It's that pervasive belief that you're not truly competent, that you're not really qualified for your role despite external evidence of success, good grades, positive feedback. It's the fear that others will eventually discover you're a fraud.
Wow, that sounds intense.